It was a chilly autumn afternoon when my niece Sarah and I arrived at my son Ben's new house. Ben and his wife Laura had recently moved into a large, impressive home that stood out with its pristine white walls and modern, luxurious design. Sarah, just 8 years old, held my hand tightly as we made our way to the front door, her curious eyes taking in every detail. As I rang the doorbell, Laura appeared with a smile, though something about her expression seemed forced. "Welcome, Patricia. And little Sarah. Just make sure you don't get into anything," Laura said with a strange tone that didn't sit well with me. Ben, always the more gentle one, quickly added, "Laura, there's no need for that. Sarah's well behaved." But as I watched Laura's tense smile, I felt a sense of unease settle over me. My niece, usually chatty, seemed to sense it too, staying unusually quiet as we stepped inside the grand living room. We were seated in the living room, a modern space with stylish furniture and a minimalist design. Laura offered us tea and some light snacks, launching into a conversation about their recent move and all the effort they had put into decorating the house. "We chose every piece so carefully," she said, her voice brimming with pride. Sarah sipped her tea quietly, her eyes roaming around the room as if she were looking for something. The atmosphere was thick with Laura's intense need to impress, but there was a strange undercurrent in her tone, of forced enthusiasm that seemed to hide something deeper. Ben sat beside us, occasionally nodding along to Laura's words, but he too seemed distracted. Just as I was starting to relax, Sarah broke the silence with a question that took us all by surprise. "Aunt Laura, who's the person in the closet next to the living room?" she asked, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Laura, whose face had gone pale. Laura's expression shifted immediately from calm composure to a look of horror. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stammered, glancing quickly at Ben and then back at Sarah as if trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. What do you mean, Sarah?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah looked up at her, a calm certainty in her gaze that was unsettling, especially coming from such a young child. "I mean, I felt someone there," Sarah replied, her tone so simple and sure that it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Laura forced a laugh, though her voice wavered. "Sarah, there's no one in the closet. You must be imagining things." She brushed off Sarah's words, but I noticed how her hands trembled as she took another sip of tea. Ben, however, looked at his wife with suspicion, his brows furrowing as he observed her reaction. He didn't say anything, but I could tell that Sarah's innocent question had stirred something within him as well. Attempting to defuse the situation, Laura suggested a tour of the house, hoping perhaps that this would distract Sarah. She led us into the kitchen, which was spacious and modern, boasting high-end appliances and a custom-made countertop. Laura took great pride in showing us every feature, from the sleek cabinets to the intricate backsplash. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was stalling. Every few minutes, she would glance nervously back toward the living room, where the mysterious closet was located. Sarah followed along, her curiosity still piqued, occasionally glancing back in the direction of the closet as well. Ben stayed close to his wife, but I could see the worry growing in his eyes. He was beginning to pick up on Laura's nervous behavior, and his silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, Sarah, with her innocent yet piercing gaze, continued to watch Laura closely. It felt as though my niece's quiet curiosity was peeling back layers, revealing secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. After we finished touring the kitchen, Laura led us down the hall, showing us the other rooms one by one. The guest room, the study, the newly decorated nursery. Each space was pristine and picture-perfect. Yet the tension in the air was palpable, growing thicker with every step we took. Finally, we returned to the living room, where the infamous closet loomed just to the right of the sitting area. Sarah, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, turned to Laura once more and asked, "Why can't we look inside the closet?" Laura's face went white, and her smile faltered. "There's nothing interesting in there, just some boxes and old things," she replied, her tone sharp. But this time, Ben spoke up, his voice steady and firm. "Laura, if there's nothing in the closet, then it shouldn't be a problem to open it, right?" he asked, his gaze fixed on his wife. Laura took a step back, clearly taken aback by his tone. She tried to brush it off, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Sensing that this was a turning point, I joined Ben in confronting Laura. "Laura, if there's nothing to hide, there's no reason not to open the closet," I said gently but firmly. Laura's gaze darted between us, her shoulders tensing as she clutched the edge of the table. Her silence was telling, and as she struggled to respond, I felt a strange dread fill the room. Fine, she said finally, her voice barely audible. But it's just storage. There's really nothing to see. Her words did little to reassure us, and as she reluctantly moved aside, I reached for the closet handle, hesitating just a moment before pulling the door open. Inside, amidst a clutter of boxes and miscellaneous items, lay a young man, barely in his 20s, bound and weak, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and exhaustion. He looked up at us, his face a pale ghost of what it must have once been, his mouth gagged with a cloth that prevented him from making a sound. For a moment, time seemed to stop as we all stared at the man in the closet. His clothes were disheveled, and his hands were bound with what looked like toy handcuffs. Sarah's small gasp broke the silence, and she clutched my hand tightly. Laura's face turned ashen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before us. "Laura, what is this?" Ben asked, his voice trembling with shock and betrayal. Laura seemed to shrink under his gaze, her usual confident demeanor replaced by sheer panic. She stumbled over her words, trying to explain, but nothing she said made sense. He needed a place to stay, and I was only trying to help," she stammered, her words tangled in a web of lies. Ben's face hardened as he listened, his eyes narrowing with each passing second. He took a step back, clearly disgusted by the situation and by his wife's shocking betrayal. Laura's frantic explanation only added to the confusion. She spoke in half sentences, her words a jumbled mess as she tried to justify the unjustifiable. He was homeless, and I thought I could help him, but he wanted to leave, and I couldn't let him go. Her voice trailed off as the horror of her actions dawned on her. The young man in the closet looked up at us, his eyes pleading for help. Ben knelt beside him, removing the cloth from his mouth gently. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. The man nodded, his voice weak but grateful. She told me she was single," he managed to say. "When I found out she was married, I tried to leave, but she wouldn't let me." The revelation was like a punch to the gut, and I felt a wave of disgust and disbelief wash over me. Laura's actions went beyond anything I could have imagined, and the realization hit us all hard. Ben stood up slowly, his face pale with shock and rage. "Laura, do you understand what you've done?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "You kidnapped someone. You held him against his will." Laura's gaze dropped, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her actions had finally come crashing down. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted someone who looked perfect, someone who could give me a perfect family." Her words were hollow, and they left us all speechless. Ben shook his head in disbelief, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "A family? Families aren't built on perfection, Laura. They're built on trust, love, and honesty. And you've destroyed all of that today," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Laura tried to reach out to him, her face streaked with tears, but he stepped back, his expression unreadable. As Laura pleaded for forgiveness, I called the police, my hands shaking as I dialed. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air, and officers entered the house, quickly assessing the situation. Laura was led away in handcuffs, her pleas ignored as she desperately tried to explain herself. "I was helping him! I didn't do anything wrong!" she cried, but her words fell on deaf ears. The young man watched in silence, his face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Sarah clung to my side, her innocent eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Aunt Patricia, is Aunt Laura in trouble?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I pulled her close, reassuring her as best I could. "Yes, sweetie, but everything will be okay now," I murmured, though I could feel the weight of the day pressing down on me. Ben stood silently, watching as Laura was escorted out of the house, his face expressionless. In the days that followed, the story spread quickly. Ben filed for divorce, unable to forgive Laura for the trauma she had caused. The young man she had held captive recovered gradually, and he expressed his gratitude repeatedly, thanking us for rescuing him. He was eventually reunited with his family, who had been desperately searching for him. Life began to return to normal, though the memory of that day lingered like a dark shadow. Sarah thankfully seemed to move on, her youthful resilience allowing her to forget the worst of what she had seen. But for Ben and me, the scars ran deeper. I often thought back to Sarah's strange intuition, her ability to sense something wrong even before any of us realized it. It was a gift, yes, but one that had led us into a nightmare we could never forget. As the weeks passed, Ben decided to sell the house, unable to live in a place haunted by such disturbing memories. He moved into a smaller apartment closer to his work, determined to start fresh and leave the past behind. The experience had changed him, making him more cautious, but also more compassionate. He began dating again, slowly opening himself up to the possibility of finding someone new. And as for me, I returned to my busy life, grateful for the peace that had returned to our family. I spent more time with Sarah, watching her grow and marveling at her unique intuition. She continued to be my little sunshine, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of hope. And though I never spoke of that day again, I knew it would stay with me, a reminder of the secrets we keep and the strength we find to face them.